Let's look at some issues with this design, and then we'll look at how to do a redesign. The first thing I notice is if I go in here and I look at this thread, I see that the thread feature does not extend out of the hole, in which case it would be impossible to put a fastener into that hole. And then so I'm going to suppress that part, and then we'll look at the two parts below that. And so I see some holes that are cut through both of these parts. But if we zoom in into this area right in here, we see that there's a misalignment right in that area. And actually, one thing I want to do is I want to go into my options, and I'll go to document properties and image quality, and make sure that you have that image quality set up high as well. But anyways, there's a misalignment between those components. And so I'm going to turn off the visibility of this part, and we'll look at this component in particular. So I'm going to open that part, and so I'll open it up, and I'm going to go to one of the sketches in this part. So I see that there is an extrusion, and actually let's look at the sketch on that extrusion. So I'm going to edit that sketch, and I see that there's a 46 and a 46 here, a 13 and a 13 here. If you did that as a center point rectangle, you can dimension this with 2 dimensions instead of repeated dimensions. But in any case, that sketch was fully constrained. And I go down, and so that I see a sketch number 72, 73, and that kind of worries me that, you know, how many mistakes were made that we're all the way up to sketch 72 and 73 on the part, and then I see a sketch here that's unconstrained, and I'll go down to this sketch, and I see that this sketch 70 is unconstrained, and I'll take a look at that sketch, and I see that most of this sketch is blue or unconstrained. So if I drag that geometry, I could drag it anywhere. I also see that there are numerous repeated dimensions. Anything that should be tied together, I will never have any repeated dimensions. So I want one dimension, I change that dimension in that location, and every place else automatically updates. So it's more computationally expensive to use a sketch pattern than it is to use a feature pattern. So whenever possible, we want to use a feature pattern rather than a sketch pattern. Let's also turn on the visibility of the relations. Actually, I have them displayed, and let me turn that back on. I must have turned it off. I see that there aren't any tangents, no horizontals, no verticals on a lot of its geometry, and so that's going to just cause all kinds of issues. You have no real control over the geometry. So, and then some of these numbers, if I double click on the number and look at the value, that one looks okay, but some of them don't make logical sense because they go out to 8 decimal places. So we're going to use dimensions that make logical sense for all of our dimensions. And right now, of course, I can't find one when I want to look for it, but there are some dimensions in here that don't make logical sense to me. If I can't measure it out on the shop floor, or at least in inspection with a precision measuring machine, I can't manufacture it. And so we try to use dimensions that make sense. So I'm going to minimize this one, and I will go to a new part file, and I'm going to start a new sketch on the top plane. And so then I'm going to do a rectangle, and I'm going to put this over to the right of the origin, and I'm going to put the midpoint of this line at the origin. So I'll select the origin, and I will hold down the control key, and I'll select this line, and I'll do a make midpoint relation. So now I know that this line, no matter how I drag this geometry, is going to stay symmetrical about that origin point. And then I'm going to dimension this distance as 26, and then I will dimension this distance as the 92. Alright, we see that this sketch is fully constrained. Now I could go through and create all of my sketches for all of the geometry. In fact, I could put everything into this sketch, but I'll try to break it into separate sketches to avoid confusion. And you may have this set to be shaded so that you can see that you have a closed contour. I'm going to finish this sketch, and I'm going to start a new sketch on the top plane. And I'm going to do the same thing where I draw a rectangle, and I'll draw this over to the right. I'm going to put a fillet in this edge and in this corner, and so I will do a fillet, and for the radius of that fillet I'm going to do as 3.5, and then I will select this corner, and I'll select this corner, and I'll say OK to that. And I changed my number of decimal places to no decimal places, so I want to at least see this one as one decimal place. So I'm going to tell that I want to see that as one decimal place, to 3.5. And then I'm going to change this line to construction, so I'll change that to construction, and then I want the midpoint of that at the origin. So I'll select the origin, I'll hold down the control key, I'll select this line, and I'll do some midpoint, and then I'm going to put some dimensions on here. So I'll dimension this distance from here to here, and I'll do that as 14, and I want that exactly 14. And then I'm going to dimension the length of this line, and I'll dimension that as 84. We see that it all turns black. It's all fully constrained. I'm going to put a construction line in here, or a center line, and I'm going to do that from here over to about here. And then I'm going to dimension the distance from this edge over to this point, and I'm going to do that a distance of 85. And somewhere I have a dimension that I wasn't expecting, because I was expecting this 85 to show up differently. On reconsideration, I guess that is where I want it. I might change that dimension at some point if I decided that isn't the dimension I want. And that's one of the advantages of parametric modeling, is you can just go in and double click on any of these dimensions to change their size. I'm going to draw a line from about right here over to the end of this line that I just made, the construction line, and then I'm going to dimension the distance from the origin over to the start of that line. So I'll dimension from here to here, and I'm going to do that a distance of 5 millimeters, and make sure I put in the precise dimension of 5 millimeters. I'm then going to draw a circle at this end of the line here, and I'll draw a circle over here at this end of the line here. And then I'll dimension the diameter of this circle as 9.5. And again, I want to see that as the one decimal place, so I'll change that to one decimal place. And then I'm going to dimension this circle, and I'm going to dimension that one as 4. Okay, so I have a couple of sketches created. They are fully defined, and let's create some geometry. So I will save my model. Every time I do something right, I save the model. I don't want to lose any work. I'm going to drag this roll-up bar to hide sketch number 2, so it's now below the roll-up bar. And for sketch number 1, I'm going to highlight that sketch, and then I'll do extrude. And I'm going to flip the distant direction to go down, and I'm going to go a distance of 4 millimeters. And so I see over here there's a folder that says Solid Bodies 1. It might be a good idea to rename that solid body, or I may wait till later to rename that. I'm going to expand Extrude 1, and I'm going to right click on Sketch 1 and turn on the visibility of that sketch. And I'll highlight that sketch and I'll do Extrude again. And this time I'm going to go up, and I'm going to go a direction or distance of 0.8. Now when I do this, I want this to be a separate solid body, so I'm going to uncheck Merge Result here. And so I'm using multi-body solids techniques, where everything I do to one part will also, I can tell it to do to the other body. So I have two solid bodies here. It might be a good idea to change the color of this body, so that I can make sure that I tell the difference between those bodies. And so I'm going to click on this one for the appearance, and I'll pick some appearance, let's say green for that one, and I will pick the appearance for this one, and I think I'll set that one to yellow or whatever colors you want, but I can now clearly see the difference between those two solid bodies. I will then do an extrusion again, so I'll select this sketch and I'll do extrude again, and this time I can either tell it to go from the origin plane, or I can offset it from this face. And so I think rather than going from the sketch plane, I'm going to start from this face, and I'm going to extrude that up a distance of 7 millimeters. And again, I'm going to uncheck Merge Solid, because I want this to be a separate solid body. And so now we see that we have 3 bodies here, and at some point you may want to rename those. So that is my first step in starting this model, is to get my different solid bodies. I'm going to turn off the visibility of sketch number 1, and I can either right click on that and hide, or I can click here in this column and hide that. And I'll also hide this body that is on top for now. And I'll drag the roll-up bar down to show sketch number 2, and I'm going to sweep a circle along this line to create a hole through both of these parts. And so I'm going to do sweep, and I'll select a circular profile, and I will select this curve, and I want it to go all the way around that curve. So if I put on my selection manager, if I do open loop curve, now it goes all the way around, or I could have selected each one of those entities individually, and I'll accept that. And then I'm going to put in as my diameter 0.635. Now I'm taking this off the original design. I'm not sure where that number came from, if that's an inch equivalent or what, but if we need to change that, we can always edit that and change it. Now I did a mistake here. I did sweep instead of sweep cut, so I'll cancel out of that, and I need to make sure I do swept cut. So circular profile, I will select this profile. It's an open loop, and I'll change that to the 6.35, and we'll say OK to that. Now when I do this though, I want to cut both of these, and I put in 0.635. I meant 0.365, not 6.35. 0.3, and if I hit the tab key, I can preview that and see it should preview it, and for some reason it's there we go. And then I can tell it to select the bodies or all bodies that it encounters. I can have it on auto select, so if it's going to know that it's cutting through those two bodies, I'll say OK to that. And then I examine it, and so I know that those two holes are lined up because we essentially matched machined or cut both of those in both parts at the same time. I will expand this and I'll turn on the visibility of that sketch again, and then I'm going to do a swept cut, make sure I get the right tool this time, and I'm going to select this line, and I need to tell it that I'm doing a circular profile. I'll select the path and changed it to 0.635 as my size, and I'll let it auto select the bodies. I'll say OK to that. Now I may want to check this one and make sure of my results. So if I hide the bottom, and let's hide that sketch for now, I see that I've cut this one in the yellow part, and if I select the green part, I see that I've cut those channels in the green part. I'll turn the visibility of that sketch back on again, and I'll turn on the visibility of the yellow part. And so for this hole, for this circle, I want to cut down into the green part 0.35, and I want to cut all the way through the yellow part. So I'll select this circle, and I'm going to do extrude cut, and also I can go ahead and get this circle as well. So over here on my selected contours, I'll also get this circle, and for distance 1 I want to go 0.35. I'll hit the tab key, and I can't remember whether it was 0.35 or 0.035. Let's put 0.035. And then for distance 2 or direction 2, I'm going to tell it to go through all. So I'll tell it to go through all in direction 2. And then I may want to, I have the one body visible or invisible. I want to make sure that I don't cut through it. So I could do, instead of well, actually I could uncheck this auto detect, and I could select these two bodies that I want to cut through to make sure that it doesn't cut through the body that I have the visibility turned off on. We'll say OK to that. Alright, so if I turn off the visibility of this sketch now, we see that we have cut down into this part 0.035, and then we've come all the way through the yellow part. We'll save this and then we'll continue on. I'm going to turn on the visibility to that sketch number 2, turn that back on temporarily, and I'll go to the top view on this. Now if it orients it in orientation other than what you would prefer, if you hold down the Alt key and the left or right arrow key, you can rotate that around to an orientation that suits you. Then I'm going to start a new sketch on this top plane, and I always use the origin planes whenever possible rather than use part faces. And so I'll right click on that, and I'll do a new sketch, and I actually turned it on. I don't need to see the visibility of it off, so I'll just hide that. And then I'm going to do a center point slot. And so I'm going to click somewhere on this line, and I'm going to come over some distance, and then I'll come up some distance, and we'll put some dimensions in here. And so I will dimension the distance from the origin over to the center point of the slot, and I want that distance to be 7, so I'll type in 7. And then I want the distance from center to center of this slot, I want that to be 1.5. And then I want the distance from edge to edge, and I should have put this dimension in first perhaps, but anyways it worked out okay, and I'll do that as 3. Notice that that sketch turns dark. It's all fully constrained. Now I could have put this sketch on sketch number 2 rather than put it into a new sketch, but sometimes it's just best to do multiple simple sketches rather than one complex sketch. And now I'm going to do another center point slot here, and so I'm going to come out here a little bit further, and I accidentally didn't get it horizontal, but we can fix that up here in a second. And so I'll put that in here, and I'll click on this line, and I'll make that line horizontal. and then I want the diameter or the distance on this one to be 2.3, and I actually, if I confess, I put it in backwards from what I wanted it, but it'll not make any difference. So I'll do 2.3. So I put in a smaller slot in that direction, and then for the width of the slot I want it to be the same, so I'm going to drag this point over till it snaps to that one. Now that is fully constrained, and I want to see this though as 1 decimal place, so let's change that to the 1 decimal place, and I also want to see this as 1 decimal place because it's 1.5, not 2. And so I have those two, and let's do one more entity here. Let's do a circle here at the center of this, and I'm going to dimension the center or the diameter of that circle as 6.5. Okay, so I'll put in the 6.5, and I'll set that to show as 1 decimal place. Alright, so now I have this geometry created, and I want to go through and use the geometry to cut my yellow and my green part. So let's rotate around this 3D so I can see this better. And so I'm going to select the inside slot, and I'll go to my features tab and I'll do extrude cut, and for get my selected contour inside this area, and then I want to go in direction 1, I want to go 0.35. In direction 2, I want to go through all, or I could tell it, if I want to make sure I don't remember there's a hidden part up above this, I could go up to surface and click on this surface, and then we see that it's going to cut down into this and then up into that. I'm going to turn on the visibility of that sketch, so let's expand that extrude cut, and I'm going to turn on the visibility of the upper part, and I'll select this circle, and I'm going to do extrude cut. Now I might turn off the other 2 parts because I only want to cut this upper part, so let's turn off the visibility of these other 2 parts, and let's select that circle again. I'm going to do extrude cut. I did swept cut, let's do that as extrude cut. And I want to go, now I could tell offset and go, click from here up, or I'll just tell it to go through all. I'll flip that direction, but I'll tell it to only, I'll turn off this auto select and tell it I only want to cut that body. So now if I turn on the other 2 bodies, we'll turn off the sketch, we'll see that the large hole only goes through the yellow and the green part. Right, I'm going to pattern these cuts, and so I'm going to do a linear pattern. So I'll select my linear pattern, and then for the direction I want to go along one edge in that direction, and I want to go along edge in this direction, and I'm going to expand this, and I'll select the feature that I want to pattern. I want to pattern this cut extrude and this cut extrude, and for the number of copies, or for the distance, let's do 8.8 in the first direction, and I want to do 9 copies. And then in the second direction I want to go a distance of 14, and I want the number of rows to be 2. And so we see that our preview we'll say OK to that. And so that cuts all of those slots. Now in this first one though, it is bigger than the others, and also I noticed that I accidentally cut through the yellow for these holes, so I need to edit this and fix that. So I don't want it to cut the large hole through the yellow part, I only want through this gray part, so I'm going to right click and I will edit that feature, and down here I'm going to select this geometry pattern. So we could have either done this as two different patterns, or if we select this geometry pattern and we'll say OK to that. And so now we see that it doesn't cut through that yellow part. Alright, I'm going to turn on the visibility of that sketch again, and on this first one we want this slot to be wider, and so I'm going to select the larger slot and I will do my extrude cut, and I will tell it in direction 1, 0.35, in direction 2 I'm going to tell it to go up to surface, and I'll select this yellow surface and we'll say OK to that. And so this one I have made wider than the rest of them. I will hide that sketch, and then we will continue on to the next step. I'll save this. Let's go ahead and finish this part, and then we'll continue on with the yellow and green part. So I'm going to go back and turn on the visibility of sketch number 2 temporarily, and so that was sketch 1 there. I need to get sketch 2, and I'll do a new sketch on the front plane, and I'm going to then draw a vertical line up from this point right here. So let's do this as a construction line, and I'm going to come up and I'll put this vertical, and now let's go around to the front view to look at this, and of course it flipped it the wrong way. I'll alt arrow keys, left to right arrow keys, get that the way that I want it, and then I'll start modeling on here. And I'm going to turn off the visibility of that sketch 2, and I will then draw a line. Let's first bring this down here, and I could tell it to snap to the top of that geometry. Now sometimes I'm reluctant to do that because now this sketch is dependent on that geometry, and so that I probably would have created this sketch earlier and then extruded that up to that point so that my geometry is dependent on the sketch rather than the sketch being dependent on the geometry. But that gets into some advanced considerations, so I'll just go ahead and I'll draw a line over here horizontally, and I will come down and I will go over horizontally again, and I will come down to this line, and I may want to go a little bit high. Well, let's go ahead to that line, and I'll come over here and I'll end it at that location. Alright, then I'm going to dimension some diameters on here, and so this first diameter is actually from an inch unit, and I want to make sure that I'm over on this side. So I could have done this as circles and extruded the circles, or we're going to do a revolve cut. So I'm going to come over on this side, and I'm going to do that as equal to 0.44 IN, and it will convert it to millimeters for me. And so I see that now. I want to show that as more decimal places, and so let's do that as, say, 3 decimal places. Now when I see that out, I see that as an oddball number. I wonder, where does that number come from? And if I double click on it, I see, oh, okay, it is by putting that equal to, it now shows it as a parameter that I can always go back and check and see and get an idea of where that number came from. And then I'm going to dimension the diameter from here over to here, and again I'll get on this side of the center line so it does it as diameter, and I'm going to do that as point or 6.51. I'm not sure exactly where this number came from, except that I'm following the original model, and I'll set that out to 2 decimal places. I may want to go and change that. 0.1 is about the thickness of a sheet of paper, so that's 1/10 the thickness of a sheet of paper. It would be difficult to hold that dimension, but I'll go ahead and put it in. It might be a conversion from an inch as well, I'm not sure. And then I'll dimension the distance from here to here as 0.4. That geometry all turns black, and actually I need to set this to 1 decimal place so I'll be able to see that. I set it to 0 decimal places for all of my other dimensions to reduce clutter on the screen. And then I want to eventually put a thread on this, and so the fastener would never be able to get into there. So I want to start my thread outside of the part. So I'll make sure that my threading tool, and this is if we're manually, I'm going to manually create my thread. And one advantage to doing this is if you're going to do 3D printing, you can put in a tolerance to account for the fact that 3D printing is not a particularly precise process. And actually, when I did that, let me undo this one step. I didn't get the midpoint of this vertical line, and if I get the midpoint, so if I get the midpoint of this one, and then I come over and get the midpoint of this one, and I'll make this line horizontal now, that ensures that I have some symmetry between here without having to put in that well, actually I will have to put in a symmetry because these lines are not staying the same angle. So either control select those, or I'm going to crossing window select those, and I'll add my symmetry. And so now we see that constraint. And we might do this in a separate sketch. Notice that this line and this line are thinner than this thicker line. So SolidWorks doesn't really like that, that we've done that, but it will work. And then I'm going to dimension that 60 degrees again. So I'll go in here, I'll put in that 60 degrees. And I'm going to dimension a diameter. So I'll select this center line, I'll select this line, and I'm going to come over to this side. And I realize that I put in this dimension down here, which I actually meant to put up here. And so I'm going to change this one, and I will make this one 9.8. And then I'll double click on this dimension, and I'll say equal to 0.44 in. So we can real easily change dimensions when we make a mistake and get them the way that we want them. Alright, then I'm going to dimension the distance from here to here, and I'm going to do that, and I can do that as a just putting a number in, but this is actually the thread is 20 threads per inch, and so that later on I can figure out where I got that from. I'm going to do this as equal to, and I'll do then 20 or 1 in divided by 20 as my calculation, and we'll say okay to that. Now I may want to see that as more decimal places, and so let's go over here and change that. I'm going to put that to 3 decimal places on that dimension. Alright, now at some point I must have undone this one. Let's put that one back to 1 decimal place. Okay, and at some point I must have changed that one, and I want that to be 9.8. and I want this one, I want to show that to 3 decimal places, because that was my conversion from inch to metric. So this was conversion inch to metric, and this was conversion inch to metric. Now we don't have to put a line across here. SolidWorks will automatically close that when we do our Revolve Cut, but just so that it doesn't give us a warning on that, I'm going to go ahead and close this off, so I have a closed profile now here to revolve. And then I'll go to my features, and I'm going to do a Revolve Cut, and it asks for the axis of revolution. I'll select this center line, and then I need to select, because I have a contour here and a contour here, I need to select the contour that I want to revolve, and so it's previewing that now, and I will tell it to go ahead and complete that large hole in this part. Now I actually wanted a part of a torus at the bottom of that, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit that sketch. I'll show it and then I'll edit that sketch. And I want to put a circle over here, and let's look directly at this, and hopefully it doesn't flip it around. And so I'm going to put then a circle. Be careful I don't get the midpoint of this line unless that's where the intention was for the circle, but I'm going to put it over here. And then I'm going to dimension this circle, and I'll do that as 0.06, and I'll accept that, and I'm going to change that to and I meant to do that as 0.6, but we'll come over here and we'll change that to 0.6, and I want that to be shown to 1 decimal place. Okay, and then I'm going to dimension the location of that, and so I'll dimension this from the center line. I want to make sure I get the center line, not the object line. I'll get the center line over to here so that I can put that in as a diametral dimension, and I'm going to do that as 8.03. I'm not sure where that dimension came from, but we'll use it as it was given on the original. I want to show that to 2 decimal places. So any of these dimensions that don't make logical sense, they could be edited to change to something appropriate. Now I want to put that arc in here. In this case it selected it for me automatically as my profile. If it hadn't, I would just edit that feature and then go into my profile and select that circle too. Alright, now I'm going to put this thread in next. So let's save the file, and then we'll do the thread. So I really kind of messed up how I did this thread, and I'm going to come back at a later date and make a new video on the proper way of doing that thread. For now I'm going to turn off the visibility of that top part, and I want to put a hole here and a hole here, and there's a couple different ways we could do that. We could do that using the hole feature, or I can do it as a Revolve Cut. Just to show how to do it, I think I'm going to do it as a Revolve Cut, and so we'll go around to the top plane, and I'm going to turn on the visibility of sketch number 2, and actually let's get sketch 2. That was sketch 22, and I'm going to then draw a profile here for doing the Revolve Cut. So I'm going to start a new sketch on the top plane, and I will draw a line from the end of this. I'll come over about like that. I'll come over, and I'm going to go at an angle, and then I'll come over horizontally. I'll go at an angle again, and this time let's come all the way over to here, and I'm going to come back to that location. This point from that sketch gave me that location. I will then hide sketch 2. I'm going to change this line to construction line, and I'm going to put some dimensions on here. So I'm going to dimension the diameter from here to here, and I will do that diameter as 1.5, and let's put that as showing 1 decimal place. And then I'm going to dimension the distance from here to here, get below the center line so it does it as a diametral dimension, and I'm going to do that dimension as 3. Now I suspect that this is for a pipe tap, in which case you would want to use the tap drill size for the pipe tap. I'm going to dimension this distance as for just this line, and I got the wrong dimension in here. Do that dimension again, and that distance is 3 as well. And when I did that, my sketch became opposite of what I want, so I'll drag these to get that more like what I intended. And I might have, there we go. I thought I might have to do those over again, but we recovered from that. And now on these angles, a standard drill point is 118 degrees or 59 degrees halfway. So on the original file, the angles were at some what I would term strange size. When I was going through college, I was working at night in a machine shop, and so when I got a job, the engineers were already gone for the day, and if I had an oddball angle on the part on the drawing, I had to make up a special tool in order to do that oddball angle. Next day I would come in and catch the engineer before they left for the day. When I would ask them, why did you do that angle, they didn't really have a good idea. Always use standard drill sizes if you can. So that would be 59 degrees or 118 degrees for the included size. And then I'll dimension this distance from here to here, and I could either do that from here to here or from here to the edge over here, and I'm going to do that as 0.2. and again, that's a tiny dimension. That's twice the thickness of a sheet of paper. So I would question, why does this need to be 0.2? Is there a logical reason for that? I mean, if it has to be, it has to be, but be aware that's twice the thickness of a sheet of paper. That's not a very great distance. I can go ahead and do the revolve, or I can put a line across here. Let's just go ahead and see the error that, or the warning that SolidWorks will give me if I just do it the way it is. And I need to turn on the visibility of this part as well, and so I'm going to go to features, and I'll do a revolve cut, and it tells me that sketch is open. Would you like for it to be closed? I'll tell it yes, automatically close that for me, and so it closes it. It's going to select those 3 bodies, and I'll say okay to that. And so now we see that that's match machine through all 3 of those bodies. I'll mirror that to the other side, so I'll do mirror. For my mirror plane, I'll get the front plane, and for the features, I'll get that last revolve, and so that is mirrored to the other side. We know everything matches up in those 3 parts. Let's go back to the top view again, and I need to put a couple extra channels in here. Let's hide this part for a minute, and I'm curious about why this one turned yellow instead of green. Let's turn off that part. I might change some of these colors on that. I could tell it to, if I click here and I go to that appearance, and actually I could tell it to, let's just try selecting the appearance again, and what I could do is remove appearances, and it didn't remove all of them. Put it back on there again. Actually, I don't want to do that on all of them. Yeah, let's do that appearance again. And I'll select that. Well, I could do it by face as well. I'm going to move on. You know, you can go and get that appearance set the way you want it on. I got it on the feature again. I need to do it. Let's just do this. So I do that appearance. For some reason I'm not thinking clearly when I go through and do this. But anyway, you get the idea. To make this entire part green. Let's just do one more. I can do this all at once, but all right. I just will settle with that. When you're in the process of making a video, sometimes all of a sudden you don't think clearly. I have a couple more channels that I want to do on here, so I will turn on the visibility of Sketch 2 again. Okay, and I'm also going to turn on the visibility of Sketch, in this case it was 22. I don't know how that became 22 instead of 3, but anyways, it is what it is. And I'm going to put a couple more arcs in here, and so let's do a sketch on the top plane. I just turned it off. I don't need it visible, and I will then draw a line from this point right here, and I'm going to go over to about right here. I'll move my mouse away and then I'll bring it back. It will convert to an arc, and I want to come to an arc, and I want to come around 90 degrees, and I can change that horizontally here in a minute, and then I'll come straight down. And I didn't want to get right to that center point, so I'll come over to here, and then I will put my tangent in between here and here, and so I'll do that as tangent, and I will click on this line and make this line vertical, and I'll put a dimension in here, the distance from here to here as 4.5. Let's show that as 1 decimal place, and then I want to dimension the radius of this arc. Now I may not need the radius of that arc. Let's try dragging this point, and I see that radius does change. So let's put a dimension on here of, let's say, 1 millimeter. Alright, and so I'm going to sweep a path along that, and then I'm going to put an arc in here. So let's do a 3-point arc. I want it to end at the center of this slot here, and I want it to go to the center of this hole, and then I'm going to click here someplace for the 3rd point. Now I would probably put this point along coincident with this line, but I'm going to put it closer to where the original was. Although the original was at a strange number, I am going to round off that number and put in 11, but I may want to put that so that this point was actually on this line coincident out here, in which case I wouldn't need that dimension. I'm also going to put an arc over here at the other end, and so I'm going to do a 3-point arc from the midpoint of this curve. Now I didn't do that as a pattern sketch, so I don't have where that point is. If I track, I might be able to to get it to stay there. I don't know if it will or not. And then I will come up to the this line someplace, and I'm going to put a third point, and I may have wanted this tangent to this, although actually when it comes out here where it's going to intersect this, the tangent might not mean a whole lot anyway. But I'll dimension the distance from here to here as 4, and I'll dimension the radius of this arc as 9. And we see that it didn't stay constrained between this point or the center of the slot. So I'm going to select this point right here, and I'll hold down the control key and I'll select this point, and I will then do a vertical relation. So it moves that straight up from that location. It all turns black. It's all fully constrained. Now I'd be tempted to put a dimension in here from here over to here. Instead of doing it the way I did it, I prefer to have geometry that isn't the sketch geometry that isn't tied to previous geometry, but I'll just go ahead and leave that in. Alright, then we have some additional channels to put in here, so I will go to the Features tab, and I'll do a swept cut, and I need to finish out of this sketch, and I will select one of these, and I want to turn off the previous sketches, so I'll turn off that sketch, I'll turn off this sketch, so I only have the sketch that I just made active, and I'll do swept cut, and I'm going to tell it a circular profile, and I think that was 0.035, but I don't recall. We may have to go back and check that again, and let's see what's happening with this. Now I want to do that as an open profile. I will then do a swept cut, and for my selection manager I want to select an open loop, and I'm going to do a circular profile, and then for the path I will select this path, and I believe that was 0.035 for the whole size. It might have been 0.06, so let me check and see what that whole size was. Actually it was 0.635, so 0.635, and I'm not sure why it isn't previewing. I'll go ahead and say OK and see. Okay, so now it previews, and it cut those holes, and again, because I did this from the both parts at once, they are match machined going through there. And I'm curious about that one, so I'm going to turn off the visibility of one of these, and I'll look. And so I see that here is the cut going through this way, and I'll turn off the visibility of the other one. So here we see the cut coming through that way, and so then we have the other two to do. So let's turn that back on. So I'll make this sketch visible again, and then we'll do this one and the last one. So I'll do a swept cut again with my selection manager on open profile. I'll select this one, and I need to tell it that I want to do a circular profile, and then I'll select that. And some reason I had trouble with, I had to restart this. Let's try that again. So let's do swept cut. Make sure it's on circular profile, and then I'll select that path, and I'm going to do the 0.635. I'll hit the tab key to preview. Now let's see if we can select this one down here at the same time. I don't know if we can or not. We might have been able to select all three of those at the same time. It doesn't look like it wants to do that. So we'll say OK to this one, and then we'll do a swept cut again. I'll put it on circular profile. I leave my mistakes that I make, I generally leave those in the video, so that if you make the similar kinds of mistakes, you can see how to recover from your mistakes. And says we don't always do everything perfectly the first time around. If I want to make this transparent, if I come up here to the this column, and I expanded that, I brought this out further, and I clicked on this arrow to expand that so I can get access to these columns. And so if I click here, that will, or click in this column, click right here, that will make this part transparent so that you can see through it. Now I'm working on a machine that doesn't have a correct graphics card, and so it doesn't work too well on my machine. If you have an OpenGL CAD card, then it should work fine. So we have all of our parts, and then if I want to, but everything's done in a single multi-body one part file. And actually I usually I would name this master file, and so whenever I do a multi-body, I name it as master file. And then to push out any of the individual parts, you can right click on that node under the solid body and tell it to insert that into a new part file. And so then you have individual part files for each one of your parts, and then you can also put those into the assembly. Because everything was matched machined together, the easiest way to make that is just, well, it's going to come into the origin anyway. You could just ground it at the origin, or if you have some moving components, or made it to the origin planes. In any case, we know everything is going to match up perfectly. Let's look at this one more time. So remember, on the original file, when we zoomed into this area right in here, it didn't appear that it was lined up. Because it wasn't lined up, the sketch to make this yellow part was not fully defined. We use the same sketch to make the green part that we use to make the yellow part, so we know that everything is lined up.